Hi everyone, my name is Thomas. I am a postdoc in University College Dublin at the Earth Institute working with Tasman. And I am coming at things from a slightly different angle, I think, than most of the other presentations today. So I'm working on work package 7, and my role has been to look at the cultural impact of coastal infrastructure changes, or in general, and looking at the cultural impact of some of the work that projects like Ecostructure do in terms of impact on the community. What does it mean for the local culture if you start changing the coastline? So one of the projects I've been working on together with Liz, who you just met, and Janine and Stuart and Taz, is a project called Exploring Residents' Affective Engagement with Coastal Infrastructures and the Landscape. So this is a project that we carried out in South County Wicklow, so that's 40 to 60 kilometers south of Dublin, along the coastline there. And what we did, we very much came at it from a cultural sort of perspective. So I've just put this up. This is actually from a sort of newspaper publication kind called the Marine Times. Liz, higher up. Can I speak up? Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So this is a newspaper kind of called the Marine Times. And this is from 2018, and it's a short article about the impact of the proposed flood relief scheme in Arklow. So Arklow is a coastal town in South County Wicklow that suffers a lot from coastal flooding and from fluvial flooding. But the environmental impact assessment for this particular intervention did not pick up loads of local concerns. Which led to a group being formed called Save Maritime Arklow. And you can see in the quote up there, one of the spokespeople said, "Our beautiful trees, the river walk and the stunning views along the riverbank and the South Quay and the harbour area are in danger of being removed forever, along with a large chunk of Arklow's maritime heritage." So what you find there is a serious concern about the impact of coastal infrastructure changes on people's sense of cultural identity. So I'm coming from a humanities perspective, which is quite a different perspective on a lot of these questions. And what I'm hoping is to be able to answer what I think a lot of people struggle with is the question of culture. What is culture? Culture is often intangible, it's hard to define. What do we do with it? How do we measure culture? Yet we find from an example like this that it's extremely important to have an understanding of what local culture is and how it is affected by these changes. The project aims were, first of all, to understand the cultural significance of people-place engagement in coastal environments. Particularly interesting for myself is to bridge the gap between my background, environmental humanities, and the social sciences. To take some of the theory that's been developed in the environmental humanities, which has a tendency, don't tell my colleagues in the field, but has a tendency to be a little bit of an ivory tower, even though it has a lot of theory that can be really useful. And take that theory and bring it to the social sciences. So here's two quotes from the environmental humanities. And because the first question that you have to answer if you want to study local cultural identity is how do you go about that? What kind of methodology can you use? And we were kind of informed by quotes, by kind of statements like these: having a body means learning to be affected. We become with each other or not at all. Sounds a little bit nebulous. What it means is people don't exist in isolation, so we become who we are through interaction with the world around us, which seems fair enough, I think. Which led us to develop a concept for this particular study, which I think we can use outside of it as well, the concept of affective engagement. So the idea is every time people, animals, objects, places, the landscapes, etc. interact, they generate meaning. So there's a sense of cultural identity value that comes from every time you interact with the world around you, which joins the material. So that's the encounter with the semiotic. And for those who don't know, the semiotic is a sign of science, a study of science, meaning making. So joining these together, you get affective engagement, which is the idea that every encounter generates cultural meaning. What we did with that is we developed a model based on something called actor network theory, which postulates the entire world as a series of interconnected actors. So we have A, B, C, D, E here, which are different actors, and they interact with each other, which would be the arrows. make it a little bit clearer. It doesn't have to be people necessarily. Can be, so A would be me, E would be Liz, but it can also be sites from the landscape. So these are some photos just from the study area. So you have Britas Bay, it's one of the more popular beaches in the coast of Ireland. One of the seal beaches near Wicklow town, and the Wicklow Lighthouse. What's interesting about encounters when you study something like this is that for a cultural sense of identity, an encounter does not have to be physical. Why is that? Liz lives in Wales, has been to Ireland, but I don't think Liz has ever been to Arklow. Yet Liz has a connection with this environment, in this sense, a professional connection, because she's been studying it along with me. But the fact that she hasn't been there doesn't mean that she doesn't have a cultural connection to it. As you can see in this slide, there is a lot of other influences in actor network theory. So if you postulate the entire world as a network of actors, if you want to describe it all, that's the rest of your life. You'll just be describing endlessly and endlessly. Because my relationship with Britas Bay is influenced by the fact that I've seen other beaches in my life. I'm from the Netherlands, I've seen a lot of beaches that look a bit like Britas Bay. But in order to account for my cultural connection to Britas Bay, you'd also have to take into account my background. Now that's going to make it very hard to study local cultural identity, because it's going to be an endless job. So what we developed is a way to capture the other influences on the direct encounter. So the direct encounter would be between me and Britas Bay. We want to circumscribe the other influences without having to fully dive into them, or just to make it practicable. So what we did is we developed a way of capturing out other influences using measures for place attachment, strength of encounter, and sociodemographics. Those would be quantitative measures. So we used a combination of questionnaires and interviews for this particular project. And we could use the questionnaires to introduce the quantitative measures to sort of circumscribe the large global network of cultural interactions. And then within the network, we could ask, within the direct interaction, we can ask sort of open questions. So we can speak to people from the community and say, can you report on your behaviors, your feelings, relevant parameters for your connection to the coastline? So this is what results. So it's an actor network approach, but it's a modified one. Outside of the directly studied network, we're using measures for place encounter, strength of place attachment, strength of encounter, and sociodemographics. And inside of it, we can really delve into some qualitative, open into questionnaire questions, respondent-led interviews, and ask people, how do you feel when you go to this place? What do you do? Why do you think you feel this way, etc. So what resulted, as I said, was questionnaires, which a suite of closed questions. So these are some of the statements that we used in order to measure place attachment. For instance, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you agree or disagree with the statement, I like the mix of plants, animals, and landscapes in this place? These are from the literature, modified from the literature, a biophysical indicator of place attachment. And then we have political, economic, psychological, etc. And we also had measures for strength of encounter, which is somewhat more straightforward. Time spent at a place in combination with frequency of visits, distance to coast, etc. So we also had these, and then we also had questions about sociodemographics, but in the interest of time, I won't be showing those. In combination with open questions. So these are some of the open questions from the questionnaire that we distributed. What is the reason you visit a particular place more frequently than others? What do you do when you visit this place? And then I followed up a number of the questionnaires with interviews. The interviews were very much respondent-led, quite long. So we really took the time to delve into what motivates you, how do you feel, what is your connection to this place? So we did this in Wicklow, Arklow. I forgot to put a map in, but yeah, trust me, it's somewhere south of Dublin. We had a lovely poster designed by Amy, and we printed that and put it around the community. There was a large component of sharing it online because that just worked really well. We got 164 questionnaire respondents, and we followed up with 7 of those for in-depth interviews. And to just give you a sense of the quality of qualitative rather than quantitative study in some instances. So this is a quote, this is a photo of Britas Bay. As I said, a very popular beach in Ireland because you can drive there from Dublin within, not too long, about 45 minutes. And someone who lived nearby said in her interview, I would be very happy if nobody ever walked on that beach ever again. But I suppose that's not really, it's not really okay. If you delve into a statement like that, there's actually loads to be found there. So here's a very deep sense of place attachment to a local place. There is a recognition of the physical and mental benefits of visiting that coast. This lady would go every day on her own, explicitly on her own, because it was her me time for sort of self-time, self-care time. But there's also, she's already considering within this one sentence, the trade-off between community benefit and personal benefit, whether it's okay to take your personal benefit over community benefit, whether she's part of a community cultural identity or personal, etc. There's a lot of value in delving into this kind of stuff, and you would be very hard-pressed to find something like this from closed questions. So the combination is quite helpful. We started to carry out thematic analysis on the open questions and the interviews. So these are some of the themes, or these are the themes that came from there. So we have 4 main themes and a number of sub-themes. So once we had that, we had a good sense of what we had qualitatively. And then Liz and Janine, mostly, and with me watching in awe from the sidelines, have been working on, meanwhile, on scaling the quantitative measures. So this is just a sample plot. This won't make it into the final paper, but this would be the encounter skilled against, the strength of the encounter skilled against place attachments. You get quite high reports on both, as you can see in the upper right quadrant. The idea, so we're still very much writing this up in the analysis phase, but the idea is that we're going to overlay the 2 types of information for a sort of combined visual representation of quantitative strength of encounter and place attachment with qualitative themes, quotes, etc. And it would look something like this. I've actually blown this up a bit in one measure. So this would be for each of the 4 dimensions of place attachment. And if we zoom into, for instance, biophysical, instead of creating a simple scatter plot with just dots, we're thinking about ways of overlaying the 2 types of information, for instance, using different symbols inside the scatter plot to indicate the strongest themes for individuals who have been mapped onto that scatter plot, if that makes sense. So each of these symbols would represent one of the respondents. And we're interested in seeing if strong reports on place attachment and encounter for biophysical measures would overlay with particular themes identified from the open information. To make that a little bit less nebulous, that would look something like this. I've done it just manually for one of the interviewees. This would be a woman, 45 to 55 years old, with strong encounter and place attachment. And the 2 main themes that emerge from her information, from her questionnaire and her interview, are personal fulfillment from coastal visits and coastal places as nexus of community identity. And the interesting thing is that the first theme kind of speaks to the fulfillment she gets from visiting the sea, whereas the second one speaks to, in the interview, you find that she participates in the local sea swimming club. She feels a very strong sense of connection to the community. She's a real sort of engine in the community, if that makes sense. One of the things we're running into is the fact that it's kind of positive, but it's also negative. There seems to be universal recognition in Ireland, at least in this community, that 1, the sea is extremely good for you. You should always go to the sea. There are great physical and mental benefits. Every single participant reports on that. And there's things you do by the sea. Everyone goes there to do something. Which is skewing our analysis a little bit, because if you start plotting it in this way, you're just going to get those themes emerging everywhere. So we're still thinking of maybe analyzing those separately, and in order to give a little bit more attention to the other themes that are emerging. See that I'm over time already. In conclusion, we've developed we're in the process of developing a transferable model for studying local cultural identity. So it allows us to understand existing local cultural connections to the coast. Why is that important? Because we firmly believe that you need a baseline understanding of what local coastal cultural identity includes if you want to be able to assess the possible impact of changes. You start changing the coastline, what kind of impact is that going to have on local cultural identity? And then finally, as I said, it demonstrates the use value of taking some of the humanities kind of style work into this other realm, which is quite helpful. Thanks very much. Sorry, gone slightly over.